notes when I talk to folks. So, all right, check it out. Like, you are going, you're going to Italy. What's the date of the World Championships in Italy?
I think it's whatever that Monday is. So like the 28th or something, I think, of August is is that Monday. And I mean, they haven't released the schedule, so we're basing a lot of what we think off of what they did in France.
Hmm.
So it'll probably be like Monday registration, Tuesday will be like zero, and then Wednesday we'll actually start shooting, would be my guess.
Man, that's really exciting though. I mean, I love the idea that a lot of these activities within shooting are starting to grow in a global context. Like that's just super exciting, whether you do it or not. You know, I'm not an air gunner or a rimfire shooter yet.
Yeah.
But I will be soon. But the idea that, man, we're getting representation from everywhere is pretty cool. Now, I don't know a ton about how the format's going to be, because it sounds like nobody really does. But I know that the centerfire ones, they had production and other divisions. Are there divisions in the rimfire world that could be hashed out?
Yeah. So there's open class. So we're sending 22 shooters from the US. There's 6 open class shooters. There's 4 factory division, which is what I'll be shooting in. There are 4 uh, young guns, 4 seniors, and 4 ladies.
Hmm. Awesome. That's that's super exciting. Do you know most of the 22 shooters that are going?
Almost all of them, actually. Like I'm
Oh,
pretty lucky that I get to go and hang out with a bunch of my buddies and represent the U.S. In
that's
fact,
amazing.
I don't know, a half a dozen of them. Like we actually all the shared an Airbnb when we went and shot the PRS Rimfire finale down in Texas back in November. I think there was 6 of us that are going to Italy. We're in that Airbnb in Texas.
Man, that's really cool. Now, is it a coincidence that there's 22 of you guys going to the rimfire championship?
Yeah, that's funny. I never put that together. So maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not.
Well, you guys are gonna crush life. Do you have a jersey yet? Is there a USA jersey?
There I haven't purchased mine yet. But yeah, there's USA jerseys. We're still working through, sponsors and that kind of stuff. So um
Sweet.
that's and we kind of talked about that last time. I I struggle with that aspect of things, so I'm procrastinating a little bit, I think.
Yeah. So let's get down into like just some like hardcore, just what are the deals with rimfires? And I want to talk about air guns. And I know that the world's that's rimfire, but you're also heavy duty in the air gun. And I want to compare and contrast rimfire and air gun for people that aren't familiar either with both, or if they're curious about air guns, because I'm super excited about air guns, and you kind of know all the information about that whole world. So when it comes to competitions in the rimfire world, um, what are the main like I'm trying to use it as in contrast, I guess, from PRS style, because those competitions kind of mimic similar stage and movement patterns. Is that true?
Yes. So if
So
you
yeah, go ahead.
it's basically a scaled down version.
Mhm.
So it's actually what got me into this um, rimfire and competing in the very beginning. I wanted to shoot long range. I didn't know anything about it, and I heard, oh, shooting a mile, that sounds pretty cool. It's something I should probably do. And long story short, I found a guy on YouTube out of Finland, and he posted a video called I can't remember exactly, but something to the effect of train for long range sniping with your rimfire. And and of course I watched the video, and I'm kind of a math geek, and he talked about ballistic scaling and
Hmm.
how the trajectory and the corrections are very similar from a rimfire to a 308. It's about 30%. So your elevation corrections in a 308 at 1,000 yards and your windage corrections are 30% of that would be your rimfire corrections at 300 yards. So that kind of got me really intrigued in it. But that's essentially what these matches are. They're just a scaled down version of a PRS match. So instead of shooting, average PRS, our average targets are probably 600 yards or so, 6 to 650, and we shoot
Hmm.
everything from a couple hundred yards out to 1,000 and a little beyond. And in rimfire, I would say our average targets are somewhere around 100 yards to 120 yards maybe for the average, and we shoot as close as 25 yards and all the way out to 300 and really beyond, depending on how crazy the match director gets. But certainly with a pretty good level of precision and accuracy out to 300 yards.
Man, that's really awesome. So I don't know anything about ballistic scaling with the rimfire, and I'm really curious because I think that a centerfire shooter can hear something like that and they can go, okay, yeah, I've heard that too, and they could just kind of blow it off. But you've shot so much in both realms and you've had awesome success. I just kind of want to hear it straight from you, like after having watched that and then spent the time and effort that you've spent learning both of those crafts. Do you think that holds relatively true? I'm not saying like you have to justify it with applied ballistics or whatever like that, but I'm just saying like um now intuitively, is what you watched on this guy's YouTube video, does it still hold true?
Absolutely. So again, you're well aware of ballistics and how environmental factors can play a big role in that. But
Mhm.
the comparison was between a 22 long rifle and a 308 Winchester.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of experience with both. I shot 308 Winchester for the first, I don't know, year and a half of my precision rifle, long range precision rifle stuff. And then of course I've shot a lot of rimfire. I actually do a rimfire challenge that's based off of that same ballistic scaling. Uh, but again, it's open to some interpretation, and there's a little bit of looseness. In my experience, at my elevation, and here in Utah, we're similar to where you're at. I'm about 4,600 feet above sea level, and with shooting a 168 grain, projectile in my 308 versus a 40 grain projectile in my rimfire, I average about 27, 28%, scaled down
Mhm.
version. But a good easy rough number is 30, and it's just easy math, 1,000 yards, 300 yards. And it's
Mhm.
very similar. Yeah, very similar to what you're going to see um, in both elevation corrections and windage corrections.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I think like it's really easy to go into the numbers and science. It's really easy to go into the art, but when somebody's a good shooter, most of the time, they have an intuitive sense, and a lot of times they say, yeah, that seems about right, and they don't just buckle down and want to argue. They're like, look, I can do it, so I don't, that's what speaks for itself, and you can do both. So I think that rather than just argue numbers, I just want to hear it from you and and ask questions based on your experience. Because I think that's really cool. Uh, when
Well, and
somebody says, you know, they, yeah.
it's a template, right? Like it's not
Mhm,
like I'm gonna take my 308 dope and go to shoot a rimfire match and be, times and everything by point 0.3. Like
mhm,
it's more about showing how similar those things are and kind of giving some credit to the rimfire. Like you can, if you have 300 yards, which across the nation is a lot more attainable than 1,000-yard ranges. So if you have a
mhm,
300-yard range, you can go in and get the type of corrections that you would see in a center fire match, right? Just with
mhm,
rimfire targets. And you can scale the targets down just the same, right?
mhm,
In PRS, we shoot, 1.5 to 2 MOA targets are pretty average targets.
mhm,
So that's an angular measurement. So that target gets bigger as it goes further away. Well, it gets smaller
mhm,
as it gets closer. So you can still keep those same size targets in a rimfire scenario, and you can go and shoot um, the types of course of fire that you would see in a precision rifle, a center fire precision rifle match, and
mhm.
you can get that practice and training and fun and what have you, all with your rimfire.
Yeah, that right. I think that that is awesome. Now, there's some striking differences, and I'm curious about the similarities, and I'm curious about the differences. And the kind of extremely obvious one is 308s have a decent amount of recoil, and rimfires have very little recoil. I would have said none until I shot a air rifle. Um, when you're training the two, what do you have to be careful about? Because you're kind of always going back and forth between centerfire and rimfire. That being able to do one thing really good is impressive, but being able to do multiple things really good, it's I don't think it scales directly because you've got to be able to not do some things at the same time that you have to add to them. And so what what would you point out to people that are curious about maybe their rimfire wanting to do centerfire or centerfire wanting to do rimfire? What would you point out as kind of the big things that you need to be mindful of, despite that there's some similarities?
Well, you nailed it. Um, if going from rimfire to centerfire, it's 100% recoil management, right? That's the
Mhm,
biggest difference. Um, I I go back and forth, and my thought process kind of changes, and in and so we'll kind of give you where I was in the past and where I am currently. In the past, I thought that rimfire is a good trainer. Um, I don't I don't necessarily know that that's true. I guess what it depends on is what is your current skill level and what skill set are you trying to train. If you're a new shooter to precision rifle, one of the biggest skill sets that I think is missing is, are you still there? Sorry, I had a phone call
yeah,
coming in. One of the biggest things that is missing as a new shooter coming into PRS is the ability to build stable positions off of props, right? Most guys that are in this sport, even the brand new guys, they could lay down on their belly and they could print a decent group, right?
mhm,
But when you get off of your belly and you're no longer prone with a bipod in a bag and you're trying to balance off of this tree branch or some rock or what have you, that position building is the challenge. And so if that's your position, rimfire is a good uh, trainer for that type of thing. It allows you a lot of repetitions for less cost. and you can learn how to build positions.
Yeah.
If your ability or if your training goal is to learn how to spot shots, then it's not as good a trainer because there isn't the recoil. And a lot of the centerfire world, that's kind of the make or break skill set. You need to be able to manage the recoil and spot your shot so that you can make a correction. And shooting a rimfire isn't going to give you that skill set. If anything, it's going to hinder that skill set because they're no, like you said, there still is recoil, but the lack of recoil compared to a centerfire is significant. And so you can build a bad position and you can force the gun into position and take a shot, and you won't pay the penalty like you would if you were shooting your centerfire, right? Because of that recoil. So you can still manage it in bad situations. Now, if you want to learn how to read wind, Rimfire is an excellent trainer because the ballistic coefficient is terrible. You're going to hold a lot of wind. Often, like we zeroed our rimfires at 50 yards, and air guns we can get into in a bit, or even worse than this. But even with my rimfire, 4 or 5 mile an hour full value wind at 50 yards at my 0 point, that's going to give me 2/10 of shift. So the point to that is that it's severely affected by wind. You go out to 100 yards and you're 7/10 of wind, 8/10 of wind, and in center fire, you got to really increase your wind speed or push your distance out a long ways to get to 6-7/10 of wind. So it's a good trainer for that sense of teaching you to pay attention, to focus, look down range, identify what the wind does, and that in those types of areas. Now, if you want to go the other way, center fire is an excellent trainer for fundamentals, because although there isn't nearly as much recoil, there still is recoil. So if you shoot a lot of center fire and you've mastered that recoil management and trigger control, then you can take that skill set in and take it with you into the rimfire world. The dwell time on a rimfire is incredibly long. So you really need to have good follow through on your trigger. Some of those guys, I'm not calling anyone out, but that shoot these ultra lightweight single stage triggers, they might struggle with some of that, right? Because you can't just slap that trigger and send around without paying the penalty there. So they both offer good training across the platform. It just depends on what your specific skill set you're trying to accomplish is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you were talking, I always write down notes. I think there's a couple things I want to ask. One, I don't know. I mean, I've heard the dwell time thing and the follow through and trigger press. I noticed that with the air rifles. It was so sensitive, and just having to I kind of had to come off of it in order to manage everything just right, because I had that tendency to lean in. Recently, I heard that some rimfire shooters have even been making the barrels longer. I can't remember exactly what the rationale was, but that it actually tightened the group, but it increases the dwell time, and even though the bullet's slowing down, the consistency was better. Is that something that you've heard or seen?
So I've heard a lot of things. I tend to be very specific and selective in the people whose opinions I put a lot of weight in.
Mhm.
There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, And my opinion on that is, if it works for you, great, keep it going. But when I tend to, or before I adopt something, there's a very select few. A long time ago, when I got into this, I was like everyone. I didn't know anything, and so you asked everyone, and everyone you talked to knew more than you, and you end up chasing your tail in circles. And a good goal is to just find one person and kind of allow them to be your mentor. And I've been very fortunate that the guy that I put a lot of faith in is an excellent shooter. And that's one of those things. Like, obviously, you want to find someone that's better than you are. And often I disagree with him, but I still kind of stay to one thing. So as to that specific question, from what I've seen in my own experience, I do prefer a longer barrel. I'm running on most of my competition guns, and I'm constantly evolving and changing things and building new. So I have several competition rimfires and a couple of backups, and I'm almost always in the middle of building something new and trying something. My average competition rimfire has a barrel length of 22 to 24 inches. And I've chose that for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason is balance. We're running these guns in center fire chassis, and center fire chassis were built for big old long 26, 28 inch, bull barrel profile guns, and they balance very well. And when you take that away and you put a very small rimfire action with a typically short barrel, the standard barrels in the rimfire world are 16 to 20 inch barrels, and they're significantly smaller. So the guns don't balance well. So the first thing I do is I want the gun to balance well. Now, a result of that, from what I have seen, is lower extreme spreads. I don't necessarily think that you're getting tighter groups as a result of a longer barrel, but you are seeing lower extreme spreads and standard deviations from what I've seen. And but that does come at a cost, right? You are increasing dwell time, and your follow through becomes more important as a result of that.
Well, that's good information. Now I'm going to jump back even more and just kind of try to haul through these because we got so much to talk about. When I think wind, right, I'm thinking wind at some distance, 600 yards and out. And a lot can be different between where you are and where it is. So when I think just primary wind stuff, right, I'm thinking direction, speed, distance of my target, and then you can get into all the nitty gritty. But that's kind of where I start, right? Where's it coming from? How fast is it going? Those are kind of measurable, and then um, I don't know what the right word is, right? I mean, at first you can measure it at your site. You could look at the terrain. You could say you could make those judgments based on experience, whether you think it's going to be faster or slower. But really, what I think of as the primary, like to make an initial wind call, for me personally, I'm thinking speed, direction. Some people might be looking at, who knows what they look at, right? But that's the first question that I want to answer to myself is, I think it's 8 miles an hour from 130. That's what I want to decide, and then we'll break it down and so on and so forth. But with with what you talked about, you didn't mention those as the primary thing. You mentioned that when it came to wind, it tuned your attention, it tuned your focus, and then your observational skills. And I know you think speed and direction also, right? Because we've been in matches together and we've talked about speed and direction. But I think as a center fire shooter, for you to be able to say, when it comes to rimfire, whether you know it or not, you described wind as a sensory thing. And I don't think of wind at the level that I shoot at as a sensory thing as much. I mean, if I feel it blast in from the other direction, my senses will pick it up, but I'm pretty dense when it comes to, like feelings and stuff. So um, I'm fascinated with the shift in language. And I was hoping maybe you could describe kind of um, why is that? Why did that stand out to me? And maybe it doesn't stand out, but to me that's pretty significant.
Well, I think that it stands out. First of all, I absolutely start my wind the same way. I want to know what's my wind speed and what's my direction. And I run a bracket system, right? So I'll run a low wind and high wind, and I run a bracket. The reason I didn't say that because I don't know that's the start of my process. But the comment that I made was that shooting rimfire is good wind practice, and the reason it is because the BC is terrible, and
Mhm.
so I have to be more tuned into what the wind is doing because it takes smaller amounts of change to have large effects on my rimfire projectile. So, for example, you're running whatever, name your brand, long range precision um, projectile. Some
Mhm.
are very good. You're running in the high threes of your BC, right? 351s, 357s, right? And
Yeah.
that's a 0.357 BC. My rimfire projectiles are running a 0.13, a 0.14 if I got something crazy. And we'll take it one step farther into the air rifles. Uh, a precision slug, I'm running a BC of 0.08, 0.09, right? So 1 mile
Amazing.
an hour difference plays a huge role. And as you are well aware, miles per hour is the least of my concern. The direction of wind is far more important to my actual wind correction than the miles per hour. I can be off 10 degrees on the clock and it's going to have a way bigger impact than if I'm off 10% of my wind speed.
Mhm.
So that's why I kind of tuned into those senses, is because the BC is so much less efficient that the wind plays a far bigger role on whether or not I hit that target. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I'm making an initial wind call, and it's based off of a direction and a speed. But once I have a bracket system, that bracket is gonna stay for the most part fairly consistent. I might run at whatever the bracket is, a 7 to a 12 mile an hour, or 7 to 11 mile an hour bracket. Well, that's probably going to stay pretty consistent throughout the match. Um, Certainly from stage to stage. Now it's going to lull. I'm going to drop off because wind never stays the same, right? It's always building and dropping, building and dropping. But I'm going to stay within my bracket. And so that's where I've got to be paying attention. Where am I at in that bracket? Am I on the high
Mhm.
side? Am I on the low side? Is that wind quartering? Is it picking up? Am I feeling a full value? And it's shot to shot, because from shot to shot, it's a miss. Like says, if we take an average target, right, 2 MOA targets, so that's 6/10, 6/10, and we've already talked about at 50 yards, I can have 3/10 of wind.
Mhm.
That's half my target right there at
Mhm.
50 yards.
Right.
So we get out to 100, 150, 200, 300 yards, and my wind bracket is 2, 3, 4 times the target width. So I need to be very attentive to what's going on.
Mhm. Okay, I'm gonna start breaking this down a little bit. We've talked before, so it wasn't rhetorical, but I you know I knew some of where you were going to go, so I kind of led you into this. Um, the For most of the center fire stuff that we shoot, I like to pare everything down and generalize like crazy. So before people start, throwing stuff at the however they listen to this, um, is a massive generalization. But if we're shooting a center fire competition and we're shooting at average distances, a mile an hour variation is probably going to move our bullet about a tenth, right? If it's full value, right? So, right, if we're 600, 700 yards, if 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 it's whatever 5 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour, that might be a tenth movement back and forth. But a tenth is pretty small when you're shooting a target that's 4, 5, 6 tenths. You have, depending on your group size, you got some wind budget. Now,
Mhm.
you're saying, like what you've said, is that at these center fire or rimfire matches, the target size are scaling maybe similarly, at the equivalent distances, except that these wind variations, they don't scale like a center fire would, because you're getting exponentially bigger movements. And so you don't have the fudge factor that you might in a center fire match. And people are missing because of wind a lot of center fire matches, but you have an even smaller budget on these rimfire matches, because if 1 mile an hour is moving at 2 tenths, you've already doubled it. And then if the distances get further, that's not linear, right? It's gonna expand
Right.
rapidly, right? Because it's gonna double at the double. At least the way I think of center fire, um, it expands out based on, well, whatever. We don't need to get into that, but 50 yards to 100 yards is not going to go from point 2 to point 4. You were saying it goes from like point 2 to point 7. So all of a sudden, you've got this massive opening where 1 mile an hour change, um, is now, or 2 mile an hour change, or whatever, is now bigger than the target. So you've got to be tuned in to things that aren't something that you would even pay attention to in center fire, right? I don't think center fire shooters in PRS or NRL Hunter or sniper matches, I don't think anybody out there is reading wind to 1 mile an hour differences, right? I just, I mean, you could shoot and say, okay, I know what the wind is, but if it changes 1 mile an hour, I'm not convinced that anybody could demonstrate that on demand, that they could tell that it shifted a mile an hour. But for you guys to be competitive, one of the skills that rimfire shooters and probably air gun shooters now are having to demonstrate is that you can sense that. I mean, we have the ability to sense it, right? We've got all the sensory stuff on our body to be able to detect very subtle shifts in wind. It's just that we don't need to tell the difference between 6 and 7 shooting at 800 yards, right? There's other things we need to worry about. But you're tuning into it because if it shifts from 3 miles an hour to 4, that could just throw you right off target all by itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, like, in a perfect world, obviously everybody screws up, but so the skill set that it demands on you to become a competitive rimfire shooter is now learning these skill sets of what is affecting it in this pretty close range. And if 50 yards away, you would expect that you could feel the wind shifts sooner, where you are, versus 50 yards away, than maybe for you and 1,000 yards away, right? I mean, sometimes you're shooting center fire and you just never feel the wind at all, but the bullet tells you there's something out there. There's a lot of wind, but
Right.
with rimfire, you're more likely going to feel that. So you tune into it, and I think that's fascinating because um, if you could leverage that back to center fire, not that you'd be able to feel it downrange, but you're tuned in a way where now you're paying attention to things that other people aren't. So if shooter A and shooter B are equivalent in skills with shooting, but you've got this sensory thing, and now you're paying attention to something other people aren't, you could leverage that back, but it takes time. Like, how long did it take you before you noticed, whoa, I'm really responding to the hairs on my arm wiggling, or like I'm gonna grow a mustache because it helps me sense the wind, or or something like that. How
Well,
long how long did that dawn on you, or did somebody tell you, look, you haven't paid attention to this before, but I really want you to like Yoda out here and and feel the wind.
so to be clear, I absolutely cannot tell the difference from 1 mile an hour wind, right? I don't believe I ever said that. But
No, no, you didn't say that, but
I do
but
want I'm attentive to it. And so for me, excuse me, it comes back to my bracket. How I before I start a stage, I I I rely heavily on the Kestrel. I'm probably the most Kestrel relied shooter out there. If the Kestrel ever goes down, I'm done, right? And that's not a good thing, but it's an awareness of my abilities. And so I use it and I run a bracket system. And so I factor different wins. And sometimes I will consider the size of the target when I'm making that bracket. Sometimes I don't, right? Like, because you take your Kestrel reading and you know how it is. You've run a Kestrel and you'll get your wind speed one and your wind speed two, and often they're the same. And if you have them up there for long enough, they'll always equal the same. If you catch it on a gusty thing, you might get 1 or 2 or 3 miles an hour difference. So I take that reading, and if it's the first reading of the day, then I'm kind of just going to make the best guess I can. If it's my 10th reading of the day, then I've seen averages throughout the day, and that's going to help adjust my bracket size. So whatever that wind speed is, 3 miles an hour to 7 miles an hour, or 6 miles an hour to 9 miles an hour, whatever that bracket is. And now I say, okay, here's my bracket. And I know, and I give 2 corrections for every target on that bracket system. And so if it's really switchy winds and gusty, then I'll write both of those brackets down. If throughout the day it's been trending always at the low end of my bracket or the high end of my bracket, I might only write one of those down. But I'm going to take all that information, and then before I start the stage, I try to recall, okay, how did the wind feel when I took this? Did it blow, the hairs on my neck? Did it blow my hair around? Did I see grass floating around, or the tree was bent over? And so that equates a visual and a touch sense to that actual wind speed. And now I get down to shoot and I'm like, okay, I feel it this, or I feel it more or less. I'm gonna go with whatever my gut tells me on a low or high call. And then I'm gonna trust the damn bullet. Like,
Right.
okay, like, oh shoot, I was wrong, right? And so, or I was
Yeah.
right, and or I was too, so then I'm gonna make adjustments as I go. But if I'm shooting a match and I've shot, I'm 10 stages in, and it's been fairly consistent through the day, and I can see, like, okay, it's picking up to this, I'm going to go with that higher speed, or what have you. But
Mhm.
it's more about starting with a good bracket for me, and then making my best guess on that first round, and hopefully I hit. And if not, or even if I do, more importantly, hopefully I saw where I hit. And then I
Mhm,
can tell like, oh, is this the real number? And then I'm
mhm,
going to take that knowledge on to the next engagement.
mhm. Totally. I get what you're saying, and I wasn't saying you said you could do it to a mile an hour, but I do think if you're detecting the feeling and the subtle shifts in the wind, you're doing something that I don't think a lot of center fire shooters are doing. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be people that hear this and they get offended and say
Well,
that they've
and
been doing it
there
all
are all
along.
the top guys are absolutely doing it. The
Yeah,
top,
yeah.
you know, like they're they're seeing changes. They're they're absolutely doing it. The only difference is the affected impact on your projectile is worse,
Hmm.
right? And
Totally,
so
totally.
you can get away with it when you're shooting a dasher at 2,800 feet per second, and it's got an amazing BC. You can it the wind needs to change significantly in order for it to push you off, right?
Hmm.
Especially these guys at the at the top tier who are their wobble zone. Like I talked to Morgan and he's like, my wobble zone's like 1/10. Shit, my
Hmm.
wobble zone is unless I'm proned out, my wobble zone is not 1/10,
Hmm.
so uh that there are guys at the top of this sport who are absolutely staying ahead of it. And that's the big thing is it's not about seeing something and making that exact call. It's because again, the wind is either building or dropping. It's never the same. And
Hmm.
so it's more about staying ahead of that. So if I shoot and I thought it was 2/10 and I see it hit at 4/10, well, my next shot should probably be at 5/10, right? Because it's been building from that 2/10 to and beyond the 4/10. So it's about staying ahead of what the wind is doing, and just any way that I can, whether I can see it or feel it or uh, I don't know, voodoo it, whatever it is.
Hmm. Right, right. Well, because I haven't been able to shoot for months, one of my obsessions has become just the cognitive process that happens with shooters that allows them to kind of open up into new areas. Because I think a lot of people they do the same thing, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm going to start training," and then they do the same thing more, and they're like, "I haven't gotten any better." It's like, yeah, because you keep doing the same thing more. We're not. I mean, you know, the tends not to make as significant a change. I mean, sometimes doing it more helps, right? Like going to more competitions, but I don't. That's not a more thing. That's an exposure to the right characteristics, conversations, and other things. So that cognitive process, I think, where I'm kind of leading you with this is that what there are tools that allow you the opportunity to expand like your horizon, so to speak, right? Like you play guitar and so if you listen to the same song over and over again, you're going to play the same song over and over again. But if I turn you on to a new style of music, all of a sudden you go, oh man, like that's crazy. And you've just opened up your awareness, but without that shift to the left or to the right, you're not gonna it's not gonna be the same thing. I think it's the same. Even I'm not I, I don't know. You get what I'm saying, and so I think that one of the cool things that doesn't get discussed a lot, but that I'm sensing from you, is that rimfires and air rifles are a tool that could help you expand your sensory skill sets that could be applied to shooting in a way that you that are harder to get with the center fire. And one of the reasons I think, if I was going to like just make a hypothesis, is a center fire, bang, and your whole body is like, holy shit, what just happened? And you blink, and it's loud, and it jerks you, and all this stuff happens, and it's like in that moment, if a fly lands on you, you're not going to notice shit. You could pour a beer on me while I'm doing that, and I probably won't notice. So having that opportunity to be like, oh man, I saw the bullet go, and at the same time, you know, after a while, you're like, hey, you know what? Like I felt the wind that time, and or I saw the wind shift, because you're not being completely startled all the time, and some people at the top of the center fire game have been doing it long enough, or they have good genes or good coaching or all the above. Like they kind of, I mean, we're talking about elite people that were selected out of tens of thousands of people that shoot to want to compete in the first place and be able to have success, and then blah 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 blah. But it's like, okay, well, through that gauntlet, a few people got really good, but maybe there's another way to get that good by saying, you know, you don't have to be startled by the shot. You can get these skills and then come in, and you'll be tuned into it already, and then deal with being startled by like getting a suppressor or a dasher or something that's not going to startle you. But I do think, like, man, there's a lot of ways from point A to point B in athletics. Like, I think about, I'm not a track person, but I have done lots of long distance stuff. I've got kids that are track runners and endurance athletes, and but a long time ago, people would say, like, just put on boatloads of mileage, just go run hundreds of miles a week, and a lot of people just got hurt running hundreds of miles, and so they didn't become good runners. But as people learned about the science, and as people learned about training, some people get really good running hundreds of miles, but some people get really good backing off on the mileage and getting really strong. And that's kind of counterintuitive, but then they can stretch it out to distance to a certain extent and now be competitive, even though they're now competing side by side, and yet they got there from two different directions. And I feel like, man, maybe in some of the shooting stuff, even though everything's branching out, there's these weird ways to reconnect, and I like that idea of sensory um, development, and it is hard to do with this loud, banging, moving thing that you say, "Oh, did you see it?" And it's like, "Man, I didn't see anything. My eyes were shut," or
Right.
"I lost my sight picture." It's like, "Well, you should be watching trace." Like, man, that's the last thing you need to tell somebody to do when they shoot and look over the scope or something like that. So I think that's pretty cool, and a cool opportunity for somebody to kind of develop skills that may or may not come back to center fire, or vice versa. But I like that. I think, anyway, I think that's pretty cool. uh, I want to now just kind of like take a step to the right and take what we've talked about to air rifles. So you're saying that you're putting in a BC that starts with point zero for a G7, which means, like, super
Well,
small.
it's a G1, but it still
Oh.
is it still is a point zero, um and a
Point zero
very
two
low.
one.
Well,
That's amazing.
like my slugs, I just came back from New Hampshire, and I was running a considerable lightweight slug for caliber, and I was running a .082 for that BC, and that's a slug, right? And if you're running a pellet, you're gonna be like a .037. Like, it's pretty much, if you throw a styrofoam brick, that's about the same BC.
That's amazing. Okay, so I want to back up, because like I came out to Utah, and we went over together to Utah Air Guns, and it's like, you think, okay, I know about rifles, and then you walk into the shop that's really nice, big, everybody's psyched. You kind of get overwhelmed at first, like, wow, this is amazing. And then you realize, they look like rifles, but everything about them is a little bit different. I don't know if Utah Air Guns is completely different than other air gun shops, but I get the impression that they take a lot of the parts and they can kind of custom r- fit and put MDT chassis and all sorts of parts together to make a rifle that is specifically put together for that customer. Is that's kind of what they do, right? Or
Yeah,
one of the things?
that's they're not quite as modular as those of us from the precision rifle world are used to. Um, but yes, there is a lot of modularity to them, and there is a lot of aftermarket support. It's not so much like you go and buy, this one chassis and you can flip it into a whole bunch of different actions. They're not quite, we're not running Rem 700 footprint air guns, at least not yet. Who knows what the future will hold? But they are very modular, and the air gun customer is very broad, and so they have to have things to accommodate all of those wants and needs. A lot of guys are pesters and varminters, where a really lightweight, compact stock, something that they can shoulder very easily and is very ergonomical, is great because they're hiking through the woods and pesting. All the way to the other side of the extreme is someone like me, who I'm only using these for competition, and I want to set it up as much like my PRS gun as I possibly can. Arc a rail all the way across the bottom, and longer fore ends, and good balance points, heavier rifles,
Mhm.
and then everything in between. Like, there's other multiple competitions that my bench rest gun is set up completely different than my precision rifle gun. I also have a gun set up for speed challenge. There's other types of competitions called field target, completely different setup for a match like that. So there is a lot of options. They're not quite all as plug and play or cross the spectrum as what we're used to. But there is certainly a number of ways to put together a rifle system to suit your needs and your end use.
Gotcha. I mean, going back in the shop and just seeing how much they were putting together for people, I was impressed that they were really building out, specific rifles for people and their needs. And I thought that was pretty cool to see. And then that they were tuning rifles for customers, and they were doing things that were just not quite the way you do it with the center fire, like the tuning, and taking some of those components to build uh those rifles out for people. So the competitions are big, right? Like they're kind of events that a lot of people come to. Or that's right? I mean, how would you compare
Yeah,
the like the 22 the match that you were just at in New Hampshire, or the one that's this summer in Utah, versus a typical rimfire or centerfire match that the listeners might be familiar with?
so they are big, and they're multiple events, right? So that's the biggest difference. A lot of people that may be listening have probably shot local matches, club matches, one-day matches, whether they're rimfire or centerfire. Um, and that's probably the most typical matches that they've shot, right? And then a more select few have been shooting the 2-day series matches. And you notice the difference between those, right? Keeping your head in the game for 2 separate days is a lot harder. It's also a lot uh, it's a lot more physically demanding, right? To be out there in the elements for 2 days. The air gun matches, there are a lot less of them. There are a few major ones, and we're talking international events. There are a few of those, and then there's a couple beyond that that are slightly smaller. But all in, we're talking less than probably less than 10 matches in a year or in a season. But they're comprised of multiple different events. So the event I just shot in New Hampshire, it was the NAC, which is the Northeast Air Guns Classic, and they had a bench rest shoot, they had a precision shoot, they had a long range shoot, and then they had a pro-am shoot. So that's 4 different events, and it's spread out over the entire week. I think we flew out on Wednesday, and then we started our zero and registration on Thursday, and you shoot all the way through Sunday, and you have the awards banquet and all of that good stuff. And so the thing I like about that is you show up, and like Thursday, for example, we registered and zeroed, and they you kind of just tool around and do a few things. Friday, you shoot like a bench rest card and maybe a long range. And then Saturday, you shoot another bench rest card and maybe the PRS. And then Sunday, you shoot the finals and maybe, the speed challenge or the pro-am or so forth. And so you're spread out. You're not shooting all day long like you would in a 1-day or a 2-day match. You're spread out over, but you're shooting multiple different events. The Rocky Mountain Air Gun Challenge, which is arguably the largest one in the world, that's the one here in Utah in about 6 weeks from now. And it's similar, but they have a couple of different events. So they'll do bench rest, precision. They do a big bore challenge and a speed challenge that's slightly different. And then kind of a similar format, like you'll do 1 or 2 of those events per day, spread out over, the better part of a week. So they're long. They're kind of grueling in that sense, right? Especially when you go out of town and you're hanging out with your buddies and you're probably staying up too late and getting up too early in the morning, and then you're out in the elements for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, day after day after day. And again, most of these events are 4 to 5 days long. So it really takes a toll on you, both physically and mentally, to stay in the game and hopefully you come out on top at the end.
Yeah. What's the like, how would you compare just the day-to-day activities and culture and vibe of all that with everybody doing so much? Is it, I kind of imagine like a carnival almost with, not carnival like with weirdos, but like everybody having fun and socializing and or is it really focused serious business?
No, it is it's a very enjoyable atmosphere. That's what got me into it. So Justin and Austin, owners at Utah Air Guns, they're friends of mine. I've known them for years, and I helped them out a couple of years ago at this event. And I was prior to that, like I've shot in all of the major series, all the major 2-day series. We're not going to name any names, but I've shot all of those series. I've shot those championship matches. I've played on that level as far as the PRS or precision rifle is concerned, at that top level and all the way to the championships. And those are big events. And this event, the Rocky Mountain Air Gun Challenge, is so much more. The year that I worked, I volunteered to RO it, and I think we had like 13 countries at that event.
That's
so
amazing.
It's crazy that that's my first experience in an international event. And we had guys from Russia there, we had guys from the UK, we had guys from from Mexico, we had people from Ecuador, Bolivia, Sweden, Slovenia. It was just amazing to see that kind of event. And it is kind of a carnival atmosphere. You got food trucks and vendors and games, and everybody's having a good time. there, there's time to focus, and that's the beauty of that type of event. Like you have, it's almost like a golf tee time, right? Like 2 o'clock, you're gonna go shoot your bench rest card, and so you can hang out with your buddies and have a good time. And then at when it's time to go to work, it's time to go to work, and you go and you're focused and you put in the work.
Hmm. Man, that sounds so cool. So, all right. So for people that are curious about the air guns, it could be intimidating to just kind of see this new platform and realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff. But what what really, I mean, talking to you really helped kind of convince me that it was the right move for me, and I'm fascinated about getting into it. So, I'm going straight into it. But for listeners, it's a decent investment to get a good setup. It's worth getting a good setup because you're just going to keep it and run with it. For me, what really did it was that after that initial investment, the cost to continue shooting, you hear some people say, well, rimfires, it's really cheap to shoot. But when you actually look at the number of rounds you end up shooting with rimfire and the price of that rimfire ammo, you're still spending a lot on ammo. I think, because I don't shoot a lot of rimfire, but when I do, it's kind of like when I shoot my carbines. You know, I'll take 100 rounds and I'll be like, crap, I should have brought 500 rounds. But I don't do that with my center fire. I'll go shoot my center fire. Sometimes I might even shoot like 12 rounds, and then I'll just be like, all right, cool, I got my 12 rounds in. If it's like a wind training thing, it's like, man, I can't train wind with more rounds than that. Otherwise, I'm just following up, and I'm not training following up. Or something like that. Or I'll just do my positional check and then I'll leave. But if I take a or if I take a rimfire or a carbine, I'm going to shoot everything I brought. And so, if I go buy Center X and I bring, I mean, you think like, oh, it's 50 rounds in a box. You think, well, 50 rounds might sound like a big number or might sound like a small number. If I shoot my gas gun, I'll shoot 200 rounds in the same amount of time. I'll shoot 20 of my center fires just because it's fun. I mean, so when it comes to the budget, there's the initial investment, but with the air guns, the price of ammo or the price of those pellets and slugs, I mean, it's literally like not a big deal, right? And you're using air. I mean, it costs something to fill up the tank. Have you done the the price comparison of centerfire, rimfire, and air gun for equivalent rounds or training time, or have
No.
you found a way to make it as expensive as centerfire?
Well, I mean, I find a way to make everything expensive. So I have a philosophy. I don't add it up because I don't want to throw up. But yeah, this sport is not inexpensive, but no hobby is, right? And no
Right.
serious hobby is inexpensive, and so especially when when you jump in to go to the top. I've never been satisfied with mediocrity. And it's not just like, that's not a bad thing. I know plenty of people that are in this sport as literally just for fun, and they hang out and they do it with their friends or their buddies or their family or what have you. And that's great. I'm not one of those people. So my results kind of skew the scale a little bit, or the bell curve a little bit, because I kind of go all in. But if you are the average enthusiast, yeah, it's affordable. And especially, again, what are you trying to, if you're trying to compete, that's a little bit slightly different. You probably want to step up a little more of the cost of the actual weapon system. But to your question, is with the ammo, it's significantly less. And you made the point that, when you shoot rimfire, it's not cheap, but it is. It's just you counteract the fact that it's cheap, and then in your head you go out and shoot much more. And that same effect will be with the air rifles because they are so much less. But then you go out there and you think, oh, these are so much less, and you end up shooting a whole tin of pellets, and you just blew through 500 rounds because they're fun as hell and they're stupid accurate. And that's the thing about these that's so nice, is you can shoot them in your backyard. I live in the suburbs in a relatively small yard, and I can shoot these guns in my backyard. And they're insanely accurate at that kind of distance. So the cost is very low, very low. You load for a 2-day center fire match, and I don't know how you do it, but I was a Boy Scout, so they, whatever, be prepared, right? So I'm going to go to a 2-day match with 300 rounds. Well, 300 rounds, they're a couple bucks a pop, right? So you're $600 in ammo. At a rimfire match this coming up weekend, we have an X match. It's actually 2 X matches back to back from the devious mind of Paul Dallin, and it's called the Burn a Brick match. It's a 500 round match, and I am so excited for this. But that's 500 rounds, and I mean, running premium ammo, that's a brick. You're $120, $130 worth of ammo, significantly less than $600 for the center fire match. I can buy, depends on what caliber and what size and what pellets versus slugs and so on and so forth. But for about $100, I can buy about 2,000 rounds of air gun ammo. So I could shoot a lot before so I went out, like I said, I just went out to New Hampshire. Both myself and my daughter went and shot, and we shot in all of the events. So we shot in bench rest, we shot in the long range challenge and the precision challenge, and they actually canceled the pro-am because of rain. But so in 3 events times 2, that's with 3 different guns, I probably spent, I don't know, $80 in ammo for that entire weekend, shooting all of those different matches. And you can't beat that. You can't beat that any way you look at it.
All right. So, but then there's even more. Like, all right, first of all, when it's raining, like if the rain hits an air gun pellet, will it just push it straight to the ground?
That depends on who you ask. There was plenty of guys shooting the bench press finals that certainly made claims just like that. Does your environmental conditions affect your projectiles? Absolutely.
Can a raindrop knock your pellet off course? That would be funny. That would be funny. Okay, wait. I'm just gonna interrupt and say so the ammo price is different, right? Because so you make your initial investment. I'm gonna just completely make everything up. If I got this there's nothing in this chassis, but it's going to be a 308. Let's just make up a center fire rifle. Say it's $3,000 without a scope, and I'm going to get a voodoo and fancy stuff, and let's just say that it's going to be $3,000. And then if I get an air rifle setup that's fancy, I might spend $3,000. So equivalently, let's say they're about the same build. Here's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize at the competitive level, or the we're taking this more seriously than just this plinking. Centerfire rifles, obviously, like 308s get more rounds, but you got a barrel life that's realistically a couple thousand rounds, right? 2, 3, something rounds. And then you're going to get a new barrel, so you're going to add $700. So not only are you shooting a couple dollars a bullet after a few thousand rounds, you're going to have to get a new barrel, and so that becomes a disposable element that's constantly turning over. with rimfire, I haven't heard people like saying they shoot out their barrels, but I do know that people have multiple barrels uh, for those. But I don't think you can shoot out a air rifle barrel. Can like and they have these plastic sleeves in them. So once you get that initial setup, unless you want a new rifle altogether, you could shoot your rifle for a long time. What's the maintenance or the turnover? What are disposable components in an air rifle after you make that investment? Are there gaskets that blow out or
Yeah,
um
you're gonna have O-rings, right? So that's really it. You're not gonna shoot out the barrel. You're not gonna wear out a barrel. O-rings and O-rings are similar to gaskets in your automobile. If you're using this system a lot, then those O-rings are going to last a lot longer. If they're not, if it's sitting and you only pick it up, once every 6 months or a year, then those things are going to tend to go out sooner. In that scenario, you might need to replace them, every year or two. If you're actively using them, you could. If I was using it actively for competition, I would probably change them out, after a few years, 3 or 4 years. But you don't have to shoot, you don't have to change any of them until they fail, if that's, if you're so inclined. On a highest level competition match, that's not how I'm going to operate, right? If I go to a a prestigious match, I take backup guns, and so I'm gonna fix things before they're broke, in that scenario. But if you're more of just an enthusiast, then yeah, then you just run it till it's done. And if you're a relatively handy person, then something, you pop a seal and you pull it apart and you put in a new O-ring. And I mean, some of these guns have a lot of O-rings, but for 20-30 bucks, you can buy an entire kit of O-rings.
right,
So
right.
it's not a very expensive maintenance program.
Right. And you don't need to get into the debate of cleaning your center fire barrel and action and all this stuff because there's no fouling, right? I mean, there's
Well,
lead.
there is fouling. There is fouling, and so you do want to, you do want to clean it. And in the air gun world, it's no more mysterious voodoo than it is in the center fire world of how often, when, where, how.
Oh,
Like, just find something that works for you and run it, and
gotcha.
that's the way I kind of take every one of my approaches is, I hate cleaning. I absolutely hate it. I hate it no matter what. um and in a center fire gun, like you said, like I run a GT mostly, and so I'm gonna shoot that barrel out roughly in a couple thousand rounds. I don't need to clean it. I'm just going to shoot it out in 2,000 rounds. Those have been a new barrel, right? So I clean that about as often as never. My rimfire, some of my rimfire, I take the same approach. I don't particularly like to clean them. I don't get the kind of results after you clean them. I feel like you got to run. I have one gun that if I clean it, like a serious cleaning, I don't trust that gun for at least 100, if not 200 rounds.
Hmm.
And now I have another one, my current Voodoo that I'm running in most of the competition. It's an ultra match tight chamber. It's a lot more sensitive. I don't clean the barrel so much, but I clean the chamber quite often, because if not, I have malfunctions. And so the air guns are the same way. Like, I'll have, one air gun, I don't think I've ever cleaned it now in the last couple of years. I have another air gun that, you know, it just doesn't seem to like it after a couple hundred rounds. And so I'll pull a patch through it.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. So I've got one coming, but I just don't have the experience with it. Now the other stuff. that I guess every is assumed, but maybe because it hasn't entered the conversation, is that they need air tanks, right? And so the different rifles had different tank size. The rifle that I'm going to be shooting has a smaller one, the Pantera, and I noticed that like when we were shooting it after like about 2 magazines, you were running the risk of having the air pressure drop, and so your velocity would go down. So you needed to make sure that you reminded yourself to go fill it up. Um, that adds to your kit, right? It's not simple like just grab the rifle and run. You got to have air tanks and then a way to fill up that air tank because you're going to shoot more than 40 rounds. So you're recharging it. Um, does that make traveling to these matches in New Hampshire more difficult?
Well, yeah, obviously, anytime you add more gear to the equation, you've got to get it there. So, um, the it's not a whole bunch more kit. It's literally one air tank, right? And so an SCBA tank, and for those of you that don't know, it's like what a scuba tank, or more accurately, what like a firefighter's tank would be carried on their pack. And they're in various different sizes. I run the 9 liter ones. They're rather large, and that one single tank will get me enough air to shoot any match that you're going to ever shoot, even if you're running the Pantera that is specifically designed to have a high power output. Therefore, it has a low round count, and you need to refill it after every stage. My FX Impact that I shot this last weekend, I have a 700cc tank on it from Air Marksman, and those are available at Utah Air Guns too. It's a 300 bar fill, so I could literally fill that gun once, and I could shoot an entire match without ever filling it.
Well,
So it really just depends on your end use and what have you. But at the end of the day, the most thing that you're going to have to add is one air tank, and everything else is the same, right? So it does
gotcha.
add to it. You do need to carry around a tank with you.
Do you have to fill it up when you get there? Like, can you fly? Do you say, or can it be full when you go from Utah to New Hampshire? Do you have to go with it empty and then have it filled somewhere?
So you can't fly with a pressurized tank, which is insane because the whole entire airplane is a pressurized tank that
Right.
has plenty of pressurized air. But these are high pressure bottles. My SCBA tank, I run at 4,500 psi. So that it is a very high pressure tank. So you can't fly with it filled. You have to degas the tank, but you can ship them ground, and that's what we did, right? So I'll ship it ground because I can fill it and ship it ground and go out to these events. But if this is a sanctioned specific air gun event, air isn't going to be an issue. They're all going to have compressors on site, in some manner or way for you to fill your tanks once you got there. So you could easily degas the tank, throw it on an airplane, and fill up when you get there.
Gotcha. And then for people that are now curious about air rifles, if they were going to do it themselves, I heard mixed things, but a lot of people said some of the just at home compressors, they can't take the abuse of filling them up all the time, and so they go somewhere to have them filled. Is that what you do, or do you just? I mean, you probably have a good compressor, but
I
um,
actually don't. So that's something that everybody has to decide for themselves, right? So they make compressors that are relatively inexpensive that will fill up your tanks. I won't buy one of those, right? I'm not your average consumer. right? I run at the highest level. And so my gear needs to run at the highest level, and it needs to be made to take the abuse. I shoot a lot of matches and I put my guns through a lot, and therefore the compressors would go through a lot. So, yeah, for me personally, I won't buy a compressor until I buy the cream of the crop compressor, and they are not inexpensive. Now, your little, DeWalt compressor that everyone has in their garage, and they, shoot a couple of nail guns, into the molding. They're not even close, right? Those go to like 120 psi. The bottles on these guns are running at 3,000 psi, and the SCBA tanks are at 4,500. So it's a specialized two-stage compressor. Like you can't just run down to your pawn shop and get a compressor. I personally, I make up for it with multiple SCBA tanks. So I have 3 of those, and then I get them filled. I'm fortunate. I live here in Utah, and Utah Air Guns is not far from me. I run down there and get them filled. Other places, fire stations, scuba shops. There are other methods that you can use to fill them. But I make up for the lack of a compressor with additional bottles.
Mhm. Gotcha. I mean, because that's kind of when I imagine people saying, "Well, that sounds good, but what are some of the hassles?" Like that. That's kind of the hassle that I think
That
about
is
here.
definitely the
Yeah.
hassle.
But I do think that the price difference when you compare the rifle setups across styles and the fact that you could train fundamentals, if you disregard recoil management, all of the fundamentals basically for an initial investment, and then you could basically carry that infinitely. That outweighed the rimfire for me, and I couldn't justify training with rimfire for center fire, kind of, for the same reason. I could just go shoot uh, center fire, and I just realized, man, I'm spending the same amount of money. So, but that shifted things the other way, and doing all the tests, um, because it expresses certain fundamentals easily in a pretty close range. You can have people do tests. If you came out, I could say, look, I want to measure some fundamentals with you, but use the air gun because we'll save $2 a shot for all of these fundamental diagnostics. Wow, that instantly, was exciting to me. And then the idea that there's these humongous competitions that are 5 days with tens of thousands of people, maybe from all over the world, or it just sounds fun and exciting. So it's like, fundamentals, and then a whole new realm of precision marksmanship, and they're shooting them far. Like, dude, some of the videos we watched when we were in Utah, I, I don't know if I don't remember it correctly, but some of those guys had groups on paper at like 200 or 300 yards that were very small, like 10-shot groups. It wasn't is Yeah, I was really blown away, like how amazingly accurate and precise their shooting was, in given the conditions of non-variable winds. But those systems were pretty incredible, and not just like, okay, we're going to shoot this at 50 yards. They were shooting at 200 or 300 yards,
Yeah.
and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
What kind of targets? If you're shooting steel, but obviously you can't shoot center fire steel and maybe tell that you hit it. Are you guys using extra thin steel so that you could actually see it
No,
respond?
I mean, it's rimfire, right? So 1/4 inch AR 400 is pretty typical, and it's plenty reactive. Like, I mean, this is very similar to rimfire. I'm shooting a lighter slug, but a lot of guys are shooting 34 grain slugs, out of a 22 caliber air rifle, and they're chucking them 1030, 1050 feet per second. Like this is literally just under rimfire velocity and energy. So
Mhm.
they're using rimfire targets, they're plenty reactive enough.
That's cool. When they hit it, if it is a heavier plate, can you see the lead
Oh yeah.
spall? Can you practice watching the signatures like you can, other rifles?
I mean, it's not like the projectiles don't explode like a center fire, right? Because you're by the time it hits the target, you're going significantly slower. But you definitely do get a signature. I equate it very similar to rimfire.
That's awesome, man. I'm super super stoked. Um, yeah, man. More than anything right now, I'm that's what I'm excited about is shooting the air gun stuff and just tinkering around with that and seeing what can be measured, what can be done in these close ranges. And there's a range just really close to me, and it's about 250 yards, and there's a designated area for rimfire. Nobody really shoots there at all. Um, Mostly law enforcement, but they don't use that lane, and so being able to go there and do a lot of this stuff is pretty cool. Um, and see what's happening, and then figure out how to go to these big events. Yeah, man, man, so exciting. I have so many like personal questions that probably have nothing to do with anything that people want to hear about, but I'm really motivated, and I think that if there's the selling point for me really is just that it's that initial investment, and then after that you're pretty much just shooting. And so if you're psyched on shooting and performance and precision, yeah, you got a little bit more wind effects to deal with, but on the other hand, like, man, we're trying to develop skill sets and senses that that's the measure of skill. And so you got these cool things that can do that really well. Man, I think that's pretty cool. Before I kick you off, or before you kick me off, what are you doing anything special to train for, or is Team USA, or are you independent for training for Italy? Or what's your plan going into it? I know you compete a lot already, so you might not have to do a whole lot of like special prep, but have you decided to kind of refocus to a training kind of program to prepare you to perform your best?
So I don't have enough time to do all of the things that I have obligations to do. But the biggest change that I've said, or I think that I will have made, is last year I was spread across basically every single series of precision rifle, and I've cut back all but the air guns with some very small exceptions. I don't intend on shooting a bunch of center fire this season. I don't intend on shooting a bunch of the hunter matches this season. And so I really am trying to get my focus back to rimfire and air. Um, I'm torn because the Rocky Mountain Air Gun Challenge is coming up in 6 weeks, and I would like to go and defend my title, or at least attempt to defend my title there.
Mhm.
And so that requires a lot of air gun practice. But the World Championship for rimfire is definitely a noteworthy event, and so I'm trying to find a balance where I can split those um, skill sets. And so, for example, the next couple weeks will both be rimfire matches, um, and really it's getting out there and shooting those types of events, the long range stuff. As we're getting into the warmer weather, then I'll reintroduce my practice days every week, and that those will all be heavily focused on the rimfire. But I don't have something specific other than kind of refocusing uh, on those types of weapon systems that I will be shooting out there in Italy.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. What now the mechanics of the air rifle, they, a lot of them, maybe all of them, are cocking from the side, whereas the bolt throw on like, what do you what do you feel like you could be jeopardizing by shooting more air rifle stuff that needs to be tuned in with the rimfire?
The only thing that I think that I'm jeopardizing is just knowledge of a system. Um, so I'm shooting factory division in Italy, and I don't shoot factory division here. And so I have tens and tens and tens of thousands of repetitions on my rimfires. And this, and I will be running a new system for this event. So the only thing that I'm really giving is as much time as humanly possible with that system, and that's muscle memory. That's everything from muscle memory to malfunctions, right? These rimfires are picky with everything. There's the tolerances are very tight, and the tiniest little things that are off can induce problems. And so the more rounds, the more successful rounds downrange, the more I have trust in a system, and the more trust I have, the more confidence I have, and the mental game is as big a part of this as anything. So that's the only thing that I feel like is uh, maybe not at the level that I would prefer in a perfect scenario, but I feel like there's ample time. So I'll put a lot of rounds down. I have two rifles that I'm testing currently uh, uh, to make a decision, and I won't make that decision until I'm confident in it. But shooting matches is good. The being under the time pressure, being under the clock, understanding like a course of fire and a stage plan, and all of these things are valuable training. So the only real difference is the physical mechanics of running each individual system.
Gotcha. Man, that's pretty cool. Shit, we've been talking a long time. um, I should probably let you go. I was about to ask you more about tuning a rimfire for something like that. But we could talk this stuff for hours and for hours. So I'm just gonna um, I'm just gonna stop it because we covered so much. I got back to back pages of notes, and I'm like realizing, holy crap, we covered so many things. Um, and I think all of it was awesome. But each little thing, I we could make it an episode on with more details. Um, but I think it was super helpful to have you on and just cover kind of your world of wild and crazy shooting and stuff like that. I'm really excited to be able to come out and do some of this stuff with you. And pretty soon, at least in the next couple months, I'll be able to shoot. So it might be after Italy that I'm gonna have to run into you somewhere and shoot together again. But that for me, it goes by really slow. But in reality, it goes by pretty fast. And so I'm gonna be
Right.
cheering you guys on from here. I'm really excited. But if people have questions about any of this stuff, is there a way, like on social media, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Probably Instagram. It's Utah Pew Pew on my Instagram, and you can send me a message there. I try to be, open and as friendly as possible. So yeah, if there's something you want to know, hit me up. If you have any specific air gun questions, any of the guys down at Utah Air Guns can answer. They're all good guys, and they're all very knowledgeable. But yeah, hit me up on Instagram, and I'll answer anything I can for you, and if I can, I know I can point you in the right direction of who can.
Awesome. Awesome. Heck yeah. Man, any parting words or anything you want to cover before we got to make more coffee?
I would just say get out and try it, man. This sport is awesome. It's been amazing to me. It's a relatively uh, short time frame. I'm just finishing up my 4th year of competition, so there's a ton of wealth and knowledge in this industry, and most everybody is a great guy, and it's tons of fun. So I would encourage everyone to just come out and try it, and just share this sport with us. We'd love to have you.
Heck yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for the time and chatting. I always like chatting with you. It's cool how the community, ends up not being so big that you just don't end up knowing everybody and being able to call it like, oh man, no, we gotta ask Boyd that, or we gotta ask somebody else.
Right.
It is pretty cool. It's a small world, but I think it's good to get good information from people that are doing it directly, and you kind of do everything, so you're a good person to ask anything to, and I like that.
Awesome.
Sweet, man. Well, thank you so much, and have a good night. I'll let you know when I get this posted up, but it'll be in the next couple days. And shoot, until next time.
Sweet, brother. We'll talk to you later.
All right, man. Take care.
Bye bye.